Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dan McGarry. He's going to talk on policy circles for the freedom to think aloud. So Dan works for the Pacific Institute of Public Policy, which is based in Port Vila in Vanuatu. He's responsible for technology, and he's going to talk about one of the projects he's involved in. Thanks, Dan.
Okay, thanks for that. Looks like we have a pretty intimate gathering, so I'll try and keep this as informal as possible. Yeah, as mentioned, Dan McGarry. I've been living and working in the Pacific for about 8 years. Before that, I was working mostly in Canada. Spent a few years up in the Arctic, and so one of my areas of particular interest is the things that happen sort of on the edges, on the frontiers of the internet. And this is one of the things that I've been involved in the last little while. The Pacific is a very expansive small town. It really is an interesting dynamic, one that I particularly like. But it's got its own very, very particular aspects that can be a little daunting. I don't know how many of you have lived in small communities. I know that sometimes the internet feels like a pretty small community when personalities start to get involved. But if you can compound that feeling, you know, when you're in a small closed group with 3,000 years of living on a given island where there's really no alternative but to either get along with everybody or, you know, watch your entire community sort of break down. That's one of the underpinnings of the dynamics that we're looking at here. And as a result, what we see is a situation in which the person is just as important as the message. You know, they're sort of given equal, if not greater, weight. And the result is that the very first conversation you have with somebody in the Pacific is, who are you? What island are you from? Who's your family? Are you associated with this person, that person, the other person? That's the first thing they need to know about you. It's not what you do or you know, any of these other things. It's quite literally they need to situate you. So in Vanuatu, the first thing you hear is, you know, oh yeah, manya emblo weya. You know, where's that guy from? Because when they know the island, they know the family, and then they know this, and then they know that, and it all leads on from there. The effect of this is often that somebody with unique or challenging ideas can feel pretty isolated. You know, they can be put into a pretty tough spot because there's a perverse sort of balance between the need for peace and the need for justice. Everybody knows right and wrong. You know, it's not like there's this sort of weird morality that is completely alienated from ours. But it's equally important that everybody, you know, that village life continue. And the effect is that if some young Turk gets up in front of the, you know, in the nakamal, in the village house, and says, you know, Chief, I'm not so sure about that idea, he's in for a pretty rough ride, okay? And the same thing, even though, you know, we've become much more urbanized, that same tradition still holds into place. So quite often what happens is that the person who objects to a problem is punished equally with the person who caused the problem in the first place. And it's a peculiar thing. I could go on for hours about it, but I don't have the time, so I'm afraid I'm just going to have to semaphore some of these things through. One of the corollaries to this is that quite often the person who causes the problem in the first place gets away with it because nobody is willing to cause, you know, to increase the ruckus. And so you get this really perverse situation where all the sort of the civic-minded people sit quietly while a few pathological personalities run rampant over the community. And the result is that we have dysfunctional governments, we have you know, weird anomalies in civic function, and a fair amount of predatory behavior that doesn't really have any check by more sober-minded people. And again, as I say, you know, part of the reason for this is because you're arguing against, you know, whenever somebody tries to say, no, this ain't right, they're arguing against 3,000 years of tradition. And it's a living tradition. It's not, you know, sort of this notional heritage that some of us may have, you know, or patriotism or one of these broader things. We're talking about the very, very real impacts of day-to-day life. Now, when you add the external influences that we see, especially from donor agencies, we start to see some very, very strange dynamics. AusAid is trying to spend, I think it's $1.5 billion this year in the Pacific region, and they're walking into an economy, say like Vanuatu's, which might push $1 billion in total economic activity, you know. And they're walking in there with hundreds of millions of dollars literally in hand and saying, so guys, what are we going to do? And the influence that they have over public policy is absolutely out of scale with anything that exists within the national boundaries. Worse still, it's a lot easier because of the institutional makeup of these organizations. It's a lot easier for them to do the rounds and say, hi guys, here's how it's going to be. You know, we've got our team of experts here. For some value of the word expert, we know exactly what we want to do. We know how we want to spend the money. So what do you say? Do you want a new wharf? Do you want some roads? And they can sort of twist things in a way that you see incredible wastage, which I'll come back to in just a moment. Another issue is just the logistical aspect of day-to-day life in the Pacific, and that is that it's actually easier to get a ticket to Australia, Asia, Europe even, than it is to get to the next island. The cost of flying from Port Vila in Vanuatu to Kiribati, for example, is about $2,000 US, whereas you can get to Brisbane on a cheap fare, you know, for 300 and change. And that has a really sort of weird effect on the overall dynamic. One of the things about having these lavish amounts of money is that it tends to pool. You know, people tend to develop vested interests around this money. This year, there was a news story came out a couple of weeks ago where we saw something like $1.3 billion going to 3 consultancies. They're all Australian-based. They're hiring, you know, hundreds of people, but these people are making out pretty well. And that's all money that's not being spent in Vanuatu or in PNG or in Fiji or wherever. That's a pretty big thing. It's a big issue because of the quality of the consulting that we're actually getting for our money. There's a ridiculous amount of cut and paste going on, and I'll get into that more as we go along. Just to give you a little taste of the kind of thing that we're seeing. Vanuatu is semi-officially a member now of the WTO. The accession vote happened in the last session of Parliament. The President has yet to sign the bill because he's a little bit scared about public reaction to it, though strictly speaking, we're in. One of the opinions and the talk that passed for debate in the public sphere was really, it was just remarkably uninformed. And so you have, you know, people like in the first quote here just coming up with absolutely wackadoodle interpretations of what WTO accession meant. And then you have, you know, really, really valid points where people are saying, you know, yeah, you can tell me about, you know, all these trade-related issues, you know, liberalization, globalization, competition, sector access. I don't know what it means. You know, I'm a copra farmer sitting in my village, and, you know, all I hear is this word WTO, and it's somewhere from outside, and I don't really like what I've seen so far from outside, so why should I support it? And then all the boogeymen start getting, you know, packaged in with this idea, and it becomes a really contentious issue. The government, very, very late in the day, when all the legislation that was required had been passed, they finally realized, you know, oh, geez, people are getting a little bit up in arms, and so they published a few, you know, sort of one-page stories that offered very, very bureaucratic responses to the situation. And there were 1 or 2 people in Vanuatu who actually got up and said, you know, hang on, guys, you know, we're not going to close down every shop in town. You know, we're not going to see, you know, our children being stolen from our houses at night. And he got knocked back by a bunch of people saying, oh, well, you would say that because you were part of the process. And, you know, he's trying to say, no, look, I was part of the process. I know what's in it, you know, and there's just a lot of mistrust and a lot of misunderstanding in the whole thing. We're still, this debate should have been happening in about 1999, which is when the process actually happened, when it was set into motion. All of the preconditions, all of the legislative elements were in place by the time the accession vote came around, because they have to be. So it was a done deal, and the only question was, do we get our prenuptial agreement, or do we go into this relationship without one? You know, do we buy into TRIPS and, you know, intellectual property laws and all kinds of other things without any protections, or do we go in with a set of rules, which is really the wrong debate to be having when we're talking about international trade, especially when you've got tiny little nations who are involved in it. Pacific Institute of Public Policy, PIP, has been around for a few years, and at this point I should introduce Derek Bryan, who's the executive director. He's come along, he's joining us, and he'll be answering some of the more policy-related questions that come out here today. They've been around for a few years, and they were really the ones who identified the nature of the problem, like the actual shape of the thing. And the issue is that you've got this sort of, you know, you've got donors and consultants and power brokers sort of floating along the top of things. And then you've got people, you know, just trying to get along, you know, from one day to the next. And there's a barrier, in effect, between the two of them. And the issue was that all the realities of day-to-day life just weren't translating up into the upper layer, and all of the policy decisions weren't being effectively communicated down. So, you know, we were stuck with this real disjuncture where we've got this privileged elite who are basically raping the country because nobody knows what they're doing, and a few well-meaning people in that bunch trying to keep the wheels on the cart, but not being able to enlist the help of the people themselves, who are the ones who are actually living the results of this discussion. So PIP came along and said, no, we're going to try and provide that translation layer. We're going to take on the really labor-intensive side of just sitting down and talking with people and speaking in the local language wherever possible, using local expertise, and then taking all of that and going back to the donors and saying, hey guys, hang on. You know, we got to do a reality check here. You know, we appreciate your desire to help, but could you maybe get a clue before you do? So one of the upshots of this ongoing effort, there's a lot of other things that PIP is doing, but we're only talking about policy circles today. It's an internet-based service, and it's trying to facilitate the process of helping those few well-intentioned and able people to, on the one hand, work together, you know, just to be able to collaborate and to be able to share opinions without being shouted down by the donors, without being sort of beset by their own communities and their own power brokers. And then to translate that into a conversation with the broader public. It's not a polite venue, okay? One of the real things, and forgive me, you know, for intemperate language, but one of the things that we really, really need to come up with is a place where people can look at a report and say, this is bullshit. Because frankly, the vast majority of stuff that gets written about the Pacific is nothing better than bullshit. And it's tough because that's where the policy decisions are, that's what the policies are being based on. And it's people without a clue. You know, they're smart people, but they just don't know what they're talking about. Now, on top of that, we have the original issue, which I mentioned, which is that, you know, people actually have to find a way to disagree about things, and that is something new in the Pacific. So people are supposed to have opinions, they're supposed to be able to disagree about things, and we have to find a way for them to do that. It's easy enough for us. I mean, anybody who's worked in free and open source software for any amount of time knows how to have a good debate, or a good fight for that matter, you know, to tell somebody that they, you know, are lacking clue one, and here in detail, voluminous detail usually is exactly why what sort of a clue you need in order to continue the debate. It's easy for us, but it's very, very difficult for somebody who's been living, again, within this island culture for a long time. And I should mention that, by the way, Canberra counts as an island. It has its own sort of insularity and its own inertia and its own conservatism as well. It's very, very difficult to get them to think differently about things. So Policy Circles is there just to try and get away from all the stuff that's holding us back and just have a very frank discussion about things. So I'm going to get into the sort of the nuts and bolts of what this service actually consists of. The defining metaphor is a circle. No, we weren't inspired by Google. It actually did come up because people tend to sit in a circle when they're talking about things where we live. So no copyright there. A circle contains a discussion, obviously. We want people to be able to sit together and talk about one thing, typically. Therefore, we need people who are members of that circle. We can have events, which I'll talk about more in a little while. We have publications, that is, longer writings of interest. And then, of course, other circles. I'm not talking about a sort of a deep and very structured hierarchy here. It's more Usenet style, just this thing refers to that thing, and that thing refers to one other thing, and it goes on from there. So the components themselves, discussions, again, are fairly flat in terms of their structure. We do want threading to be part of it. One of the more important elements is that we really, really want people to speak in full sentences. We want people to have the capability to express ideas and not just, telegraph little pointers to, broader notions. They need to be able to get into the details. Subscribers are, well, they're people. So you have one person per subscriber, one subscriber per person. We're talking about effectively an invitation-only service, and you'll see the reason for that shortly. There is one public identity associated with it, and exactly one persona, which is an identity that I'll come to in just a moment. Events are pretty straightforward. Basically, it's just a circle that's centered around something that's happening. But the only thing I'll say about it, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I could be unpacking in here, and we've thought a lot more and talked a lot more than what I'm saying today. But the idea in this talk is actually just to start the conversation, and for those of you who are interested in becoming involved or helping in any way, we can talk in a great deal more detail because there's a lot of stuff going into this. But events basically are designed to capture the hallway conversations, okay? It's really easy to get a list, a summary of talks and what have you, and to capture the video or the slideshow or whatever was associated with it. It's the conversations that happen afterwards, the reactions, the inspirations. These things are the ones that matter most to us. Publications are an editorial stream. They consist of reports, essays, commentary, so if somebody can find interesting reading, post a link to it, they can upload the document itself, and we can host it within our service. That's the ideal, actually, and there are reasons for that as well. The main part is that it's curated, okay? And it's synopsized so that somebody going through will in effect have access to an annotated bibliography of everything, of all the useful reading on a particular topic. We're talking about, having a real editorial slant on it. There's something that a friend of mine came up with, I guess it was about a year ago, he first mentioned it to me. He said, every time I read a report that starts with, Vanuatu is a nation of 250,000 people spanning 80 islands, he says, I know I can bin it. Because all they've done is gone to Wikipedia got the first page of it, and then tacked on a few generic comments after the fact. And I found that to be absolutely true. So my shorthand for the sort of how to call the wheat from the chaff is just Vanuatu is an island. Pip is going to be the one handling that, and that's not going to change, but we are looking for a lot more user submissions and user make it more user driven over the course of time. But there's always going to be a role for somebody who's just willing to take the time to sit down and read the crap that comes through and pick out the few gems that that actually merit anybody's attention. Now, coming back to the idea of identities and how to have a frank conversation in a place where everybody's eavesdropping, everybody knows your business, and everybody knows who you are. One of the ways to do this is to have private circles. So we're talking about confidential things that if we get the design, if we get the implementation that our design is asking for, that even we at PIP won't be able to read. Unless we are party to the conversation itself. So we're talking about invitation-only, confidential, encrypted discussions, circles, containing all the components that we've already seen, owned by a single individual who basically has the right to kill it at a moment's notice, and which cannot, they're irreversible. You can't make a public circle private, and you can't make a private circle public. Okay, and again, there are pretty obvious reasons for that, just because if somebody's been having a confidential conversation, and they really want to open it up, well then fine, create a public circle and recap what you've been talking about and go on from there. But we just don't want any overlap whatsoever between the two. Now, how do we get the information from these private circles, and how do we start pushing it out into the public sphere? The way we do that is through what we're calling a persona. It is an identity, okay? We're not talking about anonymity. Anonymity is a dangerous thing because people will just discard the message. But if you can build up a consistent and creative character, who's capable of who's just dissociated at a notional level at least from that person sitting in that chair working in that office, then hopefully we'll be able to start talking about ideas and not about who's saying them. You do own the customer's behavior. You can't just create a new persona tomorrow and destroy the one you've got. You can't throw them away. You have a history. So there is the issue of reputation and acquaintance, if you will, are they're quite closely tied to what we see as a persona, and it's a very convenient thing. I say the Mask of Zorro because it's not that hard to figure out who's talking about, WTO, for example, because there are only about 6 or 7 people who are really deeply involved in the debate. So it really is a little bit of a charade. We're hoping that what happens is that people will just not spend a lot of time saying, oh, I found out who, this persona is, and, now we can throw away everything that he ever said. We're hoping that they just do what all of us know how to do already, I hope, when we're working in internet communities, which is to say, all right, let's just focus in on the idea, let's just look at what's being said and judge the argument based on its merits. We can't force people to do that, but that does have to happen. Now, the constituency that we're talking about, the group of people that we think will be using this service at the outset, is a fairly small one. And these are very, very clueful people who can pick up on rules like this pretty quickly. So we're pretty confident that that is actually going to happen. Just to get into the mechanics of it for a few moments, I'm not going to throw up any flowcharts or Venn diagrams or anything like that. This all is just at the notional level still. What we're talking about is a federated data store, that is basically distributed data. There's a really compelling reason for that, and that's because the internet through most of the Pacific is utter garbage. And where it does work, it's hideously expensive. The best price that you can get for 3G in Vanuatu is 50 cents a megabyte, and it goes up from there. But in a lot of places, you just don't get it. You know, like it's just not there for eight hours, 2 days at a time. And so you have to be able to just do a quick sync with the, with the mothership, as it were, and then be able to work offline for a little while and then reconnect and resynchronize the contents of the thing. So we're looking at CouchDB for fairly obvious reasons, just because replication is built in and it's fairly parallelizable. We need to build in reliable encryption. One of the main reasons for this is we're not worried about sock puppets, we're not worried about spam, because we're talking about a small community, okay? The main vector for attack that we are looking at is somebody saying, I want to find out who said that, because they pissed me off and I want to go and beat them up. And it's happened, by the way, to friends of mine. So we really don't want somebody to be able to walk into somebody else's office while they're out, turn on the computer, and start reading through the, the things that they've been going at. There are fairly obvious limitations to that. If somebody manages to get your own personal credentials, well then, all bets are off. But nonetheless, we want to do what we can to mitigate that from the outset. Front end, we're looking at a desktop implementation right now, and all we've got basically at this stage of the game is a website, basic HTML with a little bit of JavaScript interface. But we do need to move to handheld devices, because the people that are going to be using this service at the outset, at any rate, are typically, these are, guys who are wandering around with the BlackBerry in their pocket, or an Android phone or an iPhone, maybe a tablet, and they're busy. So we want to catch them in those few minutes when they're just driving out to the airport or sitting on a plane or waiting in a hotel. Those are the moments that we want to be able to gather from them. Okay. So philosophically, the approach that we want to take is it's not quite the anti-Google. I mean, we're not sitting around saying, be evil. But the thing is, Google is all about engineering. It's taking existing services and making them easy and scaling them in ways that wasn't possible. Well, scale doesn't matter to us. The population of Vanuatu is 250,000. The largest country in the region is PNG with, I think, 6 million people. That's the biggest country that we have, okay? So we're not talking about a lot of people being involved in this. We're, on the technological basis, we're taking a sort of a magpie approach. We're just grabbing the little bits of shiny from here and there and trying to pull them together in as quick and dirty a way as possible. Because it really is, it's not so much about the technology as it is about the service. So wherever we can appropriate, that's what we're going to do. I think it needs to be said that this is something new for the Pacific. Facebook is just getting ahead of steam. In PNG, population 6 million, as I mentioned, there are 55,000 Facebook users. There are, I think, 3,000 or 4,000 Facebook users in Vanuatu, population 250,000. So we've just started to touch into this thing. But as far as this kind of service is concerned, especially with confidential communication, there's nothing. It's a big empty space. Now, again, it's something new on a broader scale as well. We're not about chatting. We're not about tweets, just throwing out a few hundred characters. We are about a conversation in depth. As the chairman of PIP said it, the aim is to inform the dialogue, improve the quality of the discussion, and not so much, we're talking about buddies in bad times, not birds of a feather, if you know what I mean. People don't have to agree on things, and they don't have to be united on things. They just have to be able to talk to one another. One point I think that's really important to make is that Twitter and Facebook, everybody talks about, Arab Spring and all this lovely stuff. They were used as logistical tools. They were mobilization tools. They weren't forming the philosophy using those tools. They were getting the people out onto the street. Everybody knew what they wanted. They want Mubarak out. That's pretty straightforward. You know, you don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about that. We don't have that luxury. Okay, we need to build the thing from the very beginning. So policy circles is a precursor. This is the thing to define the movement at which we can tie into Facebook, Twitter, and all these other services after the fact. But until we get people actually talking amongst themselves, that movement's just not going to arise, and the outside influences are going to drown us. And it's really that simple. So the idea is to attach small handles to big issues, you know, to allow people to sort of delve in as deep as they desire or as deep as they need to. And the type of people that are going to be using this service, they're an embattled few. Typically, we're talking about maybe a dozen, 2 dozen people at the core of government usually. They're very, very clueful people. I mean, these are guys who could make the rest of us in this room look pretty dumb. They're not generally very well educated because they haven't had the opportunities. There are very few get beyond a master's degree. They are generalists rather than experts within a particular field, because when you're that few, you basically have to have a clue about everything from wharf building to airport management to health delivery to education. And if you don't, then you're going to be signing the wrong checks. You know, you're going to be putting money into the wrong areas or saying no to the wrong things. And it's a big issue. So being able to access the expertise that exists, it really, really matters. It's quite important, because otherwise you're stuck talking to people who are just going to waste your time. These consultants that I was talking about earlier. And one of the worst things is that the consultants come through these days, now, because they're the only ones you get to talk to, and they just bloody waste your time. So one of the little features that we're building into this service is an out-of-office thing. These are my hours, and we're basically giving these policymakers a stick to beat the consultants and the donors over the head with. So you don't just get to rock up into the office and feel entitled to half an hour of this guy's time when he's got 6 other things on fire at the same moment. He can say, fine, just book me an appointment, or didn't you see I'm not available, I don't know why you're here, I'd love to help you, but take a number. So there's that. The tone of the whole thing, again, is really, let's just cut the bullshit. Let's just get to what we need to do. There are only so many hours in the day, and we've got to get stuff done. So the best analogy I can find is sort of like, the kernel mailing list. You don't walk in there and just start, so guys, what's a process? It doesn't work that way. You necessarily get shouted down. Just don't bug me, kid. Go back, learn something, and then come back when you're equipped. We've got to take the same sort of approach, and that's why the closed community is actually fairly integral to the whole design of this service. If it works, then these guys who are stretched for time at every moment of the day are actually going to be able to cut away some of the waste, and we're hoping that that gets reinvested into the use of the service itself. So to summarize, what we're looking at is separating the messenger from the message. It's a tough job, but we think we can do it, at least starting with this group. We want people to be able to have opposing ideas without ending up, basically in violent confrontation. It is elitist, and unapologetically so, but in the sense of getting the right people together. It's not an exclusive thing. We expect that once people learn to speak amongst themselves, and with the aid of these personas, that they can actually start disseminating a useful message to people beyond, to that copra farmer who's sitting on his island. And, so he'll actually be able to start thinking, well, where are my kids going to be in 20 years? Why don't we have a school on this half of the island? Why do I have to send somebody over there? They need to be thinking, but they're not going to send their kids to school if all the kid is going to do is come back and dry copra. You know, so there's a sort of a long process that needs to be worked out, and it's not a trivial one, and it's not an obvious one at all. But we're hoping that this is at least one tool that will sort of move things along. This isn't going to change the politics, okay? Donors will still have billions of dollars, and Pacific countries won't. And that's just not going to change. And with power comes influence and corruption and all kinds of things. That's not going to change, not in our generation anyway. It's not even going to change the rules of the whole engagement. What it will do, however, is provide a haven. Now we're not providing protection in the sense of, you know, the sanctuary, you know, in the medieval churches. But at least we can get you out of the weather for a little while, you know, and allow you to sort of sit down in one place and speak with other people who are facing the same obstacles and the same challenges that you are. We hope that what will happen from this is that when they go back into the game, the policymakers are actually going to be a little bit better equipped and a little more agile on their feet. And they'll be able to sort of front up to the donors and say, look, you know, we like it, but have you looked at these 3 reports? Because, you know, they're not saying what you're saying. And if you could just sort of explain the discrepancy, you know, then we can get along with the conversation. That's the kind of scenario that we're trying to work towards. So again, you know, sorry, this isn't a geek talk as such, because what we're hoping to do today is to say, look guys, here's a problem that we have. It's a little bit novel. It shares a lot of common aspects with the things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. But it's got a lot of new things as well, particularly private circles and personas. And I want to have that conversation. I'm desperate to have that conversation with, you know, able-minded people. But I need to give you the full problem first. You know, I need to sort of give you the summary of the challenge that we're facing, and then maybe we can start talking about implementation stuff. We do have a proof of concept up. It's at www.policycircles.com. You can sign up. There's a wait period. You need to have your membership approved. Again, that's because we're not just letting anybody and their dog into the service for obvious reasons, at least not at the outset. This is going to be free software. Our intention right now, the most obvious candidate for license that we're looking at is Apache. That might change, but I can pretty much guarantee that it will be free software regardless of what specific license we choose. Not all the content is going to be open, again, there are pretty compelling reasons for that. I know that open content is a big thing, and to share everything frankly and honestly is a wonderful ideal. In practical terms, we're just not ready. And by we, I mean the Pacific region. So, you know, we have to protect people because it can get them killed. You know, I'm not hyperbolizing here. There have been cases. There's a good mate of mine who published a few stories about a minister of state. The guy showed up in a truck with 8 of his closest buddies. They walked into the office and nearly choked him to death. And for his pains, for his sins, the minister got a $150 fine. So these are real issues. You know, there are real stakes here. So bear with us if you know, if it sounds like it's a really sort of closed and exclusive service. But yeah, the reason that we're presenting here is that we do really want to discuss, you know, how we're actually going to go about it. Lentz and I have been working on a proof of concept. We have a lot of the sort of the basic code going, and we've done a pretty good design session. So we've got some good ideas about the sort of the shape of things. But if any of you have any, you know, ideas about actual implementation, then, you know, please come and see us. And if you know anybody that wants to give us money to do it, I'll be here for as long as you need me to be here. That's pretty much it. Again, I'm the geek side of things. I've only just started with Pip, but I have been working sort of alongside them for several years. And then we've got Derek here, who's the executive director of the Institute, who's far too smart to be a real geek, but no, he can handle any questions concerning the sort of the broader issues. So I think that's it, and we can move on to questions if you like.
Hi, Dan. Really great. I know what you're talking about on a lot of levels. We're actually building a system at the moment which we call Vox Pop for exploring, getting communities to talk about policy within universities, which is where I come from. So have many of the same issues as you, how to get people into conversations and willing to put up ideas that they wouldn't normally voice in a staff meeting and things like that. Because even in a modern university in Australia, people feel threatened that if they go against the grain, it might come up in their next review for their promotion and stuff like that. And I've also visited a number of places in the Pacific, Tonga and Samoa and Vanuatu, and been to some fairly remote areas, and I know the sorts of environments you're talking about here. I just wanted to ask, are you having a place in your conversations for people who are expatriates living in the countries, and also Vanuatans that are living overseas, because they would obviously have a new perspective on some of the issues which people who haven't left may not have?
Yes. Next question. No. Emphatically yes. One of the biggest things that we want to do is to enlist the assistance, the participation of the diaspora, of the people who have gone overseas, have accumulated a lot more experience with the sort of the broader world, and help to bring that back home. Equally important is the fact that there's an immense amount of academic research that's being done that's really, really good, and it's not feeding back. It's funny because the consultants' reports, like I say, by and large, they're crap. And I mean, I'm not being, angry and opinionated here. That's just my objective assessment. But the stuff that you see coming out of academia is actually quite insightful. We've worked with a few people, and that's actually a lot of what PIP does, is try to tap into these people and to point them back to the guys who are sort of sitting in the hot seat. So yeah, it's very much, it's been in the forefront of what PIP's been at for some years now. So we're not going to lose sight of it.
Yeah, very much about getting the academic information into the life policy debate, and at the same time, linking researchers back to understanding the context in which they're researching and working in. So it's a two-way bridge, if you like.
Hi, that was really... not working. Hello, right. Thanks, that was really interesting. I'll definitely be chatting to you afterwards. I've been doing a lot of looking at how to do policy consultation using online tools for government policy and such. And but one of the things that we found, and I'd like your thoughts on it, given the communities you're working with. I've worked in a few of those countries as well, a little bit, and I know that it's a different challenge. But what we found is that if, rather than trying to build a tool and get people to come and use that tool, we found that to be a barrier of entry that just cut off a lot of people. Yeah. Whereas going out and finding out where they're having their conversations, and it might be in real space, it might be in online space, it might be on mailing lists, it might be in newsletters, but using it might be in social media, but using wherever people are to have the conversations and then to actually collate that stuff together rather than trying to get everyone to come to the one spot. What I guess has been your experience?
The first thing you learn to survive in the Pacific is to be opportunistic. You have to be. one of the things that I haven't talked about at all is the sort of the coding methodology that we're using. You know, it's very, very short iterations, keep the cost of failure small because we don't have a lot of resources. But yeah, again, just yes. And yes, with one proviso. And that is that the guys, and I'm afraid to say that they are mostly guys that we're dealing with at the outset, are fairly connected. You know, these are people who are sort of connected to a laptop or a desktop for a large proportion of the day. That's not to say that they're not walking out and having, you know, sitting down and drinking kava and having long conversations, or going to the bars, you know, and sitting with the minister and, you know, doing all of the informal stuff. But they are spending a lot of time connected. They're very, very well educated by and large. And by that I mean more in the School of Hard Knocks than anything else. You know, so they know their way around. They're not afraid of the technology. So for this, at least at the outset, I think that we're not talking about, you know, getting the thin edge of the wedge in there. We're talking about just giving them another service that's involved. Derek, I don't know if you wanted to add a little bit to that.
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, it is a really good point, and what we have observed over going around and talking with these folk in the last 10 years is that the conversations are happening. It might be a closed email chain. It might be at a conference in the corridors, or it might be by chance if we bring people together because we know like-minded folks. But those opportunities are few and far between. If you're sitting at a desk and you're dealing with all these pressures and fires going on, the last thing you're going to do before you switch off at night is trawl through literally hundreds of emails to find that. So this is not us building they will come. This is the request coming back. Let's develop a space that we can use to have these conversations and get them flowing. To enable those conversations to flow more.
A really quick question. It's more about the technology. You're talking about enabling conversations online, and you need to have a public area, you need to have a private area. You obviously have different groups of kinds of people and different needs for those different people. Yeah. What kind of solutions, open source solutions, have you been looking at for what you're doing? Because there's quite a couple I could think of straight out of the box that could pretty much give you a lot of that.
Say again, sorry, the last part?
Kind of open source solutions, technology solutions have you been looking at to allow that public-private data flow between groups of people and different permission sets and things like that, or is that a...
half of the answer is we're not there yet. Okay. We have a few particularly hard nuts to crack. One of them is the confidential information flows, you know, just setting up trusted... I mean, it's just not a simple problem. It's well-trodden ground, but implementation always requires a fair amount of attention. But basically, CouchDB on the back end, right now, we've got Modulicious Lite, Perl package, which is really great for just whipping up quick web front ends. And a little bit of generic HTML, JavaScripty stuff on the front end. So I can only give you a really short answer and say, you know, I'd love to have the opportunity to give the longer answer, but I need to have, I mean, you know, that's why we're here, basically, is so that we can start to flesh all this out and to start looking at particular toolkits.
If I bump into you again, I might, because there's about 3 or so different systems that I could recommend to you off the top of my head that I can actually give you a lot of that and have been utilised in similar situations, like not exactly the same situation, but similar kind of government policy channel discussions.
That'd be really great. It'd be really great. Just if you have a card or anything, then.
I have a couple of points. Hopefully, they're small enough. One of them was with the Mask of Zorro, and you were saying that you're going to encrypt everything, and but in practice, everyone will have a pretty good idea who's who anyway. I'm wondering whether, as technologists, we are maybe reaching for the technological solution when what's needed is a social solution. Create some sort of convention that it's rude to connect people to their personas.
Yes.
And the other one, you were saying that you have a proof of concept that's actually working. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, they say you should release early or release often, and if you have something that actually works and works well enough that you can put it on the internet, whether it might be time to actually do the release.
Should I put the URL back up? Policycircles.com. To use it in anger, I know, I'm just being a little bit glib. We've got some more things. We've got some features missing, and it's getting closer. And if it hadn't been for a bit of food poisoning over the Christmas break, we probably would have something that was pretty much ready. We were hoping to be able to announce it, or at least do a soft announcement here. To come back to the first question. Sorry, could you just?
Basically, whether for the separation between people and personas,
yeah.
social
Okay.
or technological.
Okay. You got to bear in mind that, if somebody is speaking with authority about a particular subject, they are one of a very limited number of people. Okay. So absolutely, we do need to create, the Japanese wall, the fusumi, where you pull the paper thin thing across, and suddenly that room doesn't exist anymore. We do need to create that habit of mind, but we also have a sort of a very fundamental interest that PIP cannot be responsible for outing somebody. If that happens, we've blown it. Nobody will be able to trust us. Whether they like us or not, it doesn't matter. Okay? So we need to be really, really diligent in saying we're not giving anybody up. And at the same time, we've got to be sort of very quietly encouraging people to say, guys, show a little bit of discretion here and try and be polite. And people do know how to be polite, I should add, by the way. I don't know if you've ever lived in, been in a village in the Pacific, but there's some pretty wild things sometimes, some noises that you hear coming from the hut next door because, there's no windows or anything like that. There's nothing to block the sound. And sometimes, you hear things that you never thought you should hear, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad, and people just carry on because that's in that house, so they know that, they have that reflex, but at the same time it needs to be fostered. And again, PIP's role, just from a technical perspective, we have to be seen to be taking steps to protect their confidentiality, and it does matter. We're talking about people's livelihoods and in some cases the fate of the nation. Like if somebody's having a conversation that's critical of Commodore Bainimarama, he could get into a lot of trouble, and so we need to be careful about that. So to the extent that we can do it, we will do it.
Okay, I'd like to finish up now because we're out of time. So to you, Dan, a small appreciation for your presentation here from the Linux conference.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you very much, and we thank Dan for his interesting talk.